I was born in Scotland in 1938, before the war started. Scotland was very busy at that time, and the war was beginning to become a reality to us. And a year and a half after I was born, the war started. One of the first memories I do have was when I was at school. I'd be about 5 or 6, and the war was still on. It was coming to the end, but the Germans were bombing a lot in Scotland and near Glasgow, where the shipbuilding in the Clyde was, and they were aiming to get rid of all the shipbuilding, obviously. So everything had to be black, no lights, dark curtains up in the windows, and everything was very drab and drear. We could hear the sirens going off when the bombers from Germany were coming, and they bombed in Clydebank, where the shipbuilding was, and we had bombs falling quite near where we lived in the East End of Glasgow. Every person with a garden had a can't even remember what it's called, a shelter, a bomb shelter. And we had a little bomb shelter in our garden. So when the sirens, this terrible noise came, we ran up the garden where we had a bed and blankets in, and my sister and I would get into our little suits and run up, thinking it was very exciting, but in fact it was rather serious. We all sat in this little shelter, and my first memory was of this bomb coming down. And I thought that was very exciting. But of course, to my mum and dad, they thought this could be it. This could be the bomb that sees the end of us. Fortunately for us, it did not explode. And next day, coming back from school, I was wearing my little gas mask, which we wore as children on our backs, and we pulled them on if there was any danger of any gas and any bombs coming. We had a little Mickey Mouse one, so I was wearing that, and we watched the soldiers bombing, I was going to say defusing, I suppose that would be the word, at the bomb in the garden of the next street, very, very near to us. A huge big crater of a hole in the ground. And of course, had it gone off, then probably I would not be here today. So I'm very grateful for that. But that was just coming up to the end of the war, and of course we were sent away from our town, from our cities. All the children were being evacuated. This was the future generation, which they did not want to be involved in the bombing, and so we were all taken up to the Highlands to get away from the bombing. But we didn't last too long. We came back home, and fortunately the war was coming to an end, and we're very, very grateful that we were alive, because many people were not. And since then, life just got better and better. Well, now that I'm getting an old lady, don't feel like an old lady, but I am, I can look back and lots of things have happened in my life. And I'm full of amazement as a Christian that I have stuck on the course, because it's not an easy course, but it's life in its fullness. And I see life completely differently as you've gone on, and you realize that you've been shaped gradually, not as fast as you should have been, but your attitude, especially in the society we live in today, we're very different in our outlook and thoughts. And even watching the television and people giving their thoughts and their ideas, they are so far from how God has created us and the principles that He's given us to live by, all men, not just Christians, all men. And you step out of that line and you pay for it. So that applies to a Christian life as well, but also to others, and those who have put God out of their mind completely. will find one day that they were wrong. I was brought up in a very lively church, Church of Scotland, and in those days there were quite a few Church of Scotlands that were very active, very evangelical. And through the Scripture Union in my school, when I was about 12, 13, and through my church and the missions that I went on with them, I came into faith. I don't have a date or a time, but I found myself following Christ. I would like to have a date, sounds better, but you look at what you are now and what you believe now and how God has led you, and you realise, yes, His hand's been on me, and it's great. And since these days, life has been quite exciting for me, just a step at a time, ups and downs. And there was a period when I sort of turned away completely because I wanted to experience everything in life that was going on. But I'm back, came back, and it's great. So that was the start of my Christian life when I was very young. I worked in a telephone exchange when I was 15, did a training there, did that for 6 years and enjoyed it. Then when I was 21, I started to think about nursing, and I had never thought about it ever in my life. I thought it was one of the mad notions that I was quite regularly taking. And after a lot of thought and a lot of months, I went ahead completely blindly to be accepted without any qualifications, which you could not do today. But in those days, with interviews and essays and all that kind of thing, what we used to call intelligence tests, not quite sure what that was, but that's what we had. I was accepted for training. I was a bit older than the rest of the girls in my group, but there were 3 Christians and we blended together with different backgrounds. It was great. And I loved my training in a big Glasgow infirmary. I really saw life in the raw. I'd never seen death before, and in my first ward I saw quite a number of deaths, and did of course during my training. And I knew then that Christ was the answer to life, and had opportunities to talk about that and about my faith. And it opened up a whole new life to me and to my family. They loved hearing all the stories of all the daft things I did and the things I dropped and all the mistakes I made. But it was great. I really enjoyed it. And by the end of the 3 years, I went to do further training up in the north of Scotland in Aberdeen. And in those days, Aberdeen was no oil. There's lots of, that's where the oil from Scotland was discovered, in Aberdeen. And now it's a very different city than when I went in 1964. It was just a real Scottish Christian, had been a very Christian city, with the boys going to the church on a Sunday in their kilts and everything. And I loved it. I went to the Baptist church when I was there. I was baptised by immersion, which I found very thrilling to do. That confirmed everything that I had believed in. I had been engaged at that time to a very nice Christian lad, and he drove me up to Aberdeen. I was 25 or 26, but he wasn't allowed to come in with my case up the stairs. No men allowed where the nurses were. That shows you how long ago that was. He had to get special permission to carry my case up the stair. And so I was there for 6 months, and during that time there was a very, very well-known outbreak of typhoid in Scotland, in Aberdeen, and it came from Argentina in a meat content that came from Argentina. And as it was being sliced in this beautiful upmarket restaurant, the meat was being cut, and it was being spread to every other meat that was being cut on the machine. And it became a very, very worldwide outbreak of death in Scotland, with typhoid. I was doing my maternity training at that moment, and we were very frightened that the typhoid would be brought in among the babies, which would of course been fatal. So my memories were scrubbing floors and scrubbing beds and having typhoid injections and working very hard to try and keep everything immaculately clean. And people were being shipped out of Aberdeen away from the city, and the whole of Aberdeen emptied over the summer. All the people that were coming to Aberdeen on holiday from abroad, and even to Scotland from abroad, were cancelling because of the typhoid outbreak. But eventually, of course, it did die down, and I came back down to Glasgow to do my midwifery among very poor homes. I really saw life in the raw there too. I carried on with my nursing, and then I went to Bible College for 2 years, which was completely full-time in Glasgow in the Bible Training Institute. And I had a great 2 years there with 200 students, 100 fellows and 100 girls from all over the world, different nationalities, different backgrounds, different cultures, different denominations, but a oneness there. It was wonderful. And if you'd heard the singing every day when we came into class, all sitting in this huge auditorium, it was great. And we did work in the evenings with the churches, with the youth of the churches, and that was good. So that was great. When I went to Bible College, I thought, now, I remember praying, Lord, if you're wanting to send me to the back of Africa, into the jungle, you can forget about it, because that is not me. I'm sorry, but I ain't going into the wilds among all the tribes. Please, not me. It's just not my scene. So I kept away from all the missionary meetings. I wasn't going to get the call. So, and at the end of it, I ended up applying to a missionary society to go to India. And I was accepted by this very good society called Bible and Medical Missionary Fellowship, working in India. When I went for my interview, they had my health check to make sure I was all right. I told them that I had a sort of reaction to the sun when it was very hot, a sort of prickly heat. And so they sent me for all kinds of tests with rays and heat, and I had no problem. And they said, oh, you'll be fine. So I was due to sail in the September of 1968, I think it was, to India. And everybody was amazed that I was doing that, and I was amazed that I was doing it. But at that time I felt it was right. And I came on holiday here, near where I live just now, in Nunellan, the month before in August, and my sister was over from the States. And it was a lovely, lovely summer. And I took my reaction quite badly. I went down to the local GP doctor, and he said, you will not survive in India with that reaction. He said he had been in the RAF during the war, and he said we sent boys back home who took that wild rash all over their body. So after all the planning of getting there, all my plans fell through, and I did not sail in this September. And I thought, Lord, what are you trying to teach me? You've taken me 2 years to get me to the point of going and planning to go, and now I'm not going. Looking back now, of course, I see all the plan. I would not have done well in India, and I knew that. So that was a real lesson to learn. I mean, it was great, really. So what was I going to do then? I had no job, I had no nothing. So the doctor that had seen me on holiday was looking for a district nurse. So I was the district nurse in Scotland, and it was lovely. I had a year driving around in and out private homes, and I really enjoyed that. And then I started to think, I'm sure I could take a hot climate. I am sure. So I thought, I know what I'll do. Hopefully God was leading me, although I don't remember directly being directed, but my thoughts were going towards the services, the military services. So I looked at the three services, the Navy, the Army and the Royal Air Force. I liked the Air Force's uniform, so it was blue, and I thought, oh, I like that, nice blue cape and a big thing. But at that time, when you were already a trained nurse, you went in with the Queen's Commission, and it was 4 years. The Army and the Navy were 2 years. Why they were different, I can't tell you. And I thought, I've no idea what I'm going into. I could be landing myself in big trouble. So if it is all that bad, then I'll survive 2 years. But 4 years is a bit of a commitment. So I drove down to Catterick and had my interview in the Army, and there I was in the Army. I had to learn to march and to salute. I had an Army uniform, but I was basically a nurse. And as a midwife, they wanted to use me as a midwife in the Army. And that was the beginning of my Army training. I went to Aldershot, and then I went to Colchester in England, and I was working in the military hospital. I did a year there, and then I was posted to Germany, and I was there for 3 years. My 2 years had been extended by my choice, and I did 3 years in Germany, and I loved that. I had my car in Germany. I drove all over Belgium, France, Austria, Switzerland, and I obviously was a member of the Officers Christian Union, the OCU, and I was meeting some lovely Christians of different ranks, high ranks and low ranks, and I was excited to find that my faith, coming from a little Scottish family, a bit sheltered, to find out in the big world of the forces, my faith was standing up, and I knew that I had the truth. I thought, that's terrific. That is really great. And I was excited. And your eyes are opened. I enjoyed the beauty of the countries that I travelled around, and I was just so excited about everything. So I did 3 years in Germany. That was 4 years altogether I had done. And I wasn't sure about staying in and becoming a regular officer. So I came out in 1973, having done 4 years. And I got a gratuity for every year that I had done. So I came out with £1,100 in 1972. And that was a fortune in those days. That was a lot of money to a single girl. And I thought, what am I going to do with all this money? I could go and buy a car, and then it would be gone. And through really leading, when I look back on it, I bought a little house, a tiny little house in Scotland for £4,500. And everyone was horrified. A single girl. In those days you didn't do that, you know. Anyway, I got my little house, and my brother came, my father came, my mother came. We did the house up. My father did the garden. My brother fixed the windows. And I had a lovely little house which I stayed in. And I worked in the local hospital in Falkirk as a midwife. And I did that for a couple of years. Then I thought, what am I doing back here? You know, my friends had moved on, they'd got married, they'd had families, and I decided to go back into the Army. So I reapplied down to London. I was 37, and you had to go in before you were 38, so I thought, I'll have to move if I'm going to do that. So back I went to London for my interview, and I was accepted back in. And I was posted to London, so I had a year in London, still in the Officers Christian Union, and everywhere I went I joined up with the Christians, so I worshipped in all kinds of setups. You know, it was great, because the unity is there. If people really do love the Lord and want to serve Him, then there is a unity there from even different backgrounds. And I was impressed by some of the senior officers in the Army, the humility that they had, because there was a lot of pride and a lot of ego to go around with a rank on your shoulder. But when I met some lovely Christian senior officers, I thought that's what it's about. And the Lord uses these people. So I eventually became a major in the army, which is quite a nice rank for a girl. I did that for a year, and then they sent for me and said, we're taking you out of nursing and we're giving you a liaison officer's job in the north of England, which was based in York and the whole of Yorkshire. I was driving around with an army car, and I was taking careers lectures in schools. So I had all the fourth-year girls, 16-year-olds, and sometimes I only had 20 in a little village. Sometimes I had 200 in one of the cities, and I had to speak to them and show them glamorous films of Cyprus and Hong Kong. And if they wanted to think of joining, they had to go to the recruiting office. So the major that went with me, he would have the boys and I would have the girls. And I loved that job. And I should have done 2 years, and I did 4. And after a while, the property in Yorkshire was very much cheaper, and I bought a house in York and sold my house in Scotland. And each time I did it, I made a bit of money and got a bigger and better house. And when I was in York, I joined the church there, very well-known Church of David Watson, who was a very well-known Christian leader in Scotland, in England, in York. And it was heaving with students, and I was just thrilled to hear the gospel being preached so openly. And they did a lot of drama in the streets and a lot of talent there too. And it was wonderful to see it being used like that. So I did that for 4 years, and I started going into the hospitals because off my own bat I thought, when I went into the army, I had no idea what I was going into, and I'm going to go in and see if I can speak to some of the nurses who are finishing their training, who are thinking of the services. So I would turn up at the teaching department, and they were very suspicious because I had an army uniform on. But when they realised I was just another nurse, they used to give me an hour with the girls when they were, and I had a ball, very informal, telling them about what it meant and what travelling and all the things, the rules of the army and things like that. They asked me, how do you have to march? Do you have to salute? Yes, I demonstrated how you saluted. And how do you get court-martialed? And all of these sort of things. So we had a good laugh. And eventually, when I ended up in Hong Kong, half of the midwives under me were girls that I had recruited in my travels. So that was a great job. I loved that. I was living in the officers' mess for a year, and then I moved into my house, and I opened my house up, and I had people staying there with me from the church, and that was great. We had some great times there. Open house. Then I wasn't very well for a while. I was so busy, I doubled my workload, which I hadn't been asked to do, and I was so tired, exhausted. I was off for 3 or 4 months just with exhaustion and couldn't stop crying, and I think it was just all too much for me. But that was a good time to learn, you know, don't do it in your own strength, and stop manipulating everything and stop working so hard. Relax, be still. You know, I still have to learn that. And obviously I got better, and then I was posted to Hong Kong. So I rented out my house and off I went to Hong Kong. And I loved it in Hong Kong, absolutely loved it. And I had a little car there, and I buzzed all over Hong Kong, and the traffic was really quite something, as you can imagine. And I met up, of course, with the Christians there, and speaking in tongues and the gifts of the Spirit were very strong there. As you know, I met up with Jackie Pullinger, who was an English girl doing wonderful work among the drug addicts in Hong Kong. It was most impressive. And they all spoke in tongues, and it was really quite something. So I was really blessed when I was there. Wonderful. And then I decided that I would resign my commission and come out. I had a house at home. I was in my middle 40s, I thought, no matter how senior I become, there's always going to be somebody telling me what to do above me. And I just felt that the time had come for me to get back to York and get involved in the work there. So that wasn't looked on very kindly, because once you've got a commission from the Queen, because in the meantime I'd become a regular officer, I had to go through more interviews to be accepted. You're not automatically accepted, and you're privileged to serve your Queen until you retire. So eventually I came out after 7 months' notice, in which time the Falklands War had blown up and all leave was cancelled, and my coming out was cancelled because they wanted the midwives and nurses that they could get to work on the ships going to the Falklands, and I just dreaded the thought of doing that. In 1982 I came back from Hong Kong, and I had been interviewed for a deputy matron's post in York, and I had a lovely job there for 2 years as deputy matron in the grounds of the Minster, the famous Minster. This was actually in the grounds, and I had a lovely flat when I was on call I lived in, and I looked up from my bed literally down towards the Minster, down the lane, and I loved York. It was a beautiful city, and lots of Christian witness there too, which was really great. But in the meantime I had met a Scotsman in Hong Kong, back from home, and that was beginning to develop that friendship, and eventually I came back up to Scotland after a year. I sold my house, broke my heart to sell my lovely little house. Anyway, I came back up and was married in Scotland, very happily married, and that was the beginning of a whole new life for me, really. I was 48 when I got married, and I wasn't looking for a man. I wasn't looking to be married by that time. I was having a very good life, and as a Christian I had felt very fulfilled. But it was lovely to then be loved like I'd never been loved before, and to love as I'd never been allowed to love before. And it was just so thrilling to do that and to belong. It really was, and I wasn't expecting it, so these things happen when you're not looking for it. And I had a very happy 22 years married, and we moved around in Scotland to different houses. I think the one I'm in now is my fifth house, and we had a very happy time. Unfortunately, my husband took dementia quite badly and deteriorated very, very quickly, and that was tragic for me to watch him fading away in front of my eyes. Fortunately, we had moved to an apartment that I'm in just now, because we had quite a big house with a beautiful garden. He was a great gardener with a beautiful garden, and we'd moved into the apartment thinking that we were getting older and the garden was too much, really. And then he started to be poorly, and I had to have him hospitalised eventually, because dementia was very, very bad. But he knew me right up till the end, which was great, because it was a cardiovascular one, so he was taking little strokes and then plateauing, strokes and plateauing, and every time I went to see him there was something else he couldn't do. So there's more and more of that happening, and I'm now involved with people with dementia, and it's heartbreaking for the families and for the wives, and you've lost them a couple of years before you physically lose them. And I was having trouble here keeping my husband in, and he was getting up to work in the middle of the night, and there's no reasoning with people with dementia, you know. You have to go along with what they're saying, and it was hard. So that's where I am now, but my husband's been dead nearly 8 years now, and I've been on my own since then. I'm in the local church. I'm helping to run a few couple of Bible studies. I'm getting older. I'm feeling that I'm getting older, slowing down a little bit. But I've looked back with great gratitude for the life that I've had, and throughout it all. Maybe some of the decisions I made, the places I went weren't correct, but the Lord knows your heart, and when you go off the track, He will guide you back if you trust Him for that, and that's what I've done. And I'm beginning to look forward to heaven when I get very tired and sore. I've had a couple of bad accidents, and when I look back, I don't know how I came through them. And Scotland was known as the land of the book. It was very narrow, and there was a lot of criticism looking back how regimented and Victorian, the times of Queen Victoria, Victorian. But underneath that, there were some godly men, preaching the word, and preaching it with a seriousness that maybe we don't like today. We like everything to be, not people to feel uncomfortable. We want them to feel comfortable with what they're being told, because it suits them. We're all like that. We don't like to be told that we're wrong or that we should be living a better life. And I'm afraid now I've seen so many changes in society from the 40s that I think we're heading for big trouble, because the way our standards are going out the door, and the way our children are being taught, it fills me with horror. We're not giving them any kind of instruction. I'm talking generally, of course. We're not teaching them from the Word. We're not giving them direction and principles. Whatever they want, they can do it. Whatever they want. Do it now, not tomorrow, now. If you want it, you do it. That's not what the Scripture teaches. And the rules and regulations, be it from the Old Testament or the New Testament, are for our good, to give us the best in life. If only we could get that across. It's not to restrict us, necessarily. It's not to take the good things away from us. It's to give us fullness of life. That's what Christ said. Come to give you life and life abundantly. And we need to prove that. And when we do prove it, it's fantastic. Then we get the rest of the things into perspective. We do. We do. And we know what's right and we know what's wrong, without being narrow-minded or whatever. So that would be my recommendation. Christ has come to give us life, and life eternal. And not just in this life, but in the life to come. And as you get older, that's very important to look ahead. Amen.
Yes.